When I walked into the boardroom that morning, my son barely looked up from his phone, and my daughter-in-law gave me the kind of smile you give a stranger who's wandered into the wrong meeting. I was wearing the same brown cardigan I'd worn to church for 15 years, carrying a thermos of coffee instead of a briefcase, looking exactly like what they wanted everyone to see. A tired old man who didn't belong in a room full of lawyers. I heard Madison's quiet laugh, soft and cruel, the kind of sound that finds the one weak place in your chest and presses on it. To them, I was a problem to be managed, an old fool who'd outlived his usefulness. But then the company's outside counsel, a silver-haired man I hadn't seen in over a decade, looked up from his folder and froze. I watched the pen slip from his fingers and roll off the table. His voice, when it finally came, was barely above a whisper. "Wait," he said. "Wait. That's not." Every head in that boardroom turned toward me. The hum of the air conditioning was suddenly the loudest thing in the room. My son Cole frowned, glancing between me and the lawyer like he'd missed something. Madison's smile faltered for just a second before she caught herself. They had no idea, not even the slightest idea, who they'd been dealing with for the last 6 weeks. "My name is Walter Tillman. I'm 68 years old, a widower for going on 3 years now, and until that Tuesday morning, I thought the worst thing that could happen to a man my age was losing his wife. I was wrong. If you've ever had someone you trusted look you dead in the eye and lie, you understand part of what I went through. If that someone was your own child, you understand all of it. I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button for me. And if you stick around, tell me in the comments what state you're watching from. I like knowing who's sitting with me tonight." It started on a Tuesday in early spring, on what should have been an unremarkable afternoon at my house outside Asheville, North Carolina. My wife Carol had been gone almost 3 years by then, taken by a stroke that gave us no warning and no time to say the things you think you'll always have time to say. Since then, the house had gotten quiet in a way I never got used to. I filled the silence with woodworking in the garage, with tending Carol's rose beds because letting them die felt like losing her twice, and with the business I'd spent 31 years building from a single hardware store into a regional chain of 14 locations across 3 states. When I finally stepped back from day-to-day operations after Carol passed, I handed the financial oversight to my son Cole. He'd married Madison 9 years earlier, a woman who moved through every room like she was already calculating its resale value. Cole had an MBA and a confident handshake, and I told myself that was enough. I told myself blood was blood. That Tuesday, I walked out to the mailbox at the end of my long gravel driveway the way I did every afternoon, more out of habit than necessity. Between the seed catalogs and a flyer for a church fish fry, there was a certified letter from the county. I tore it open expecting some routine notice about property assessments. Instead, the bold red stamp across the top read, "Final notice lien filed, immediate action required." My hands went cold standing right there in the driveway. I read it 3 times before the words settled into something real. According to the county, I owed back property taxes on 3 of my commercial properties going back 14 months, and a lien was already in process. That made no sense. 6 weeks earlier, I had personally wired $42,000 to Cole specifically to cover those exact tax bills, after he told me over Sunday dinner that he'd take care of everything so I didn't have to worry my head over paperwork. I called Madison first because Cole never answered his phone during business hours. She picked up on the 5th ring, her voice clipped, irritated, the sound of someone interrupted at a nail salon. "Walter, I'm kind of in the middle of something." I told her about the lien notice, kept my voice steady, told her I'd given Cole the money weeks ago and needed to understand what had happened. There was a pause, the kind of pause that tells you more than words do. "Walter, you're probably just remembering it wrong," she said, that practiced gentleness sliding into her voice like a blade into a sheath. "Cole handles all of that. I'm sure it's just a clerical mix-up at the county office. We'll come by tonight and sort it out. Don't get yourself worked up." Quote, they arrived a little after 7. Cole's German sedan crunched up the gravel, headlights washing across the porch where I'd been sitting in Carol's old rocking chair, the letter folded in my lap. Cole stepped out in his work clothes, tie loosened, looking thoroughly unbothered. Madison followed in heels that weren't meant for gravel driveways, carrying her phone like a shield. I led them inside and set the lien notice on the kitchen table between us. "Explain this to me," I said. Cole barely glanced at it. "Dad, this is nothing. I paid those taxes weeks ago. The county's system is a mess. Everybody knows that. This letter was issued 4 days ago, I said, tapping the date. It says no payment was received. If you paid it, show me the confirmation. He and Madison traded a look, the kind that says, here we go again. Dad, stop interrogating him, Madison snapped, stepping closer, resting a manicured hand on Cole's forearm like she was restraining a man under attack. He's handling your finances because somebody has to. You haven't been yourself lately, you know that. I'm not confused, Madison. I'm reading a legal document. You are confused, Dad, she said, her voice climbing just enough to claim the room. Last week you forgot Cole's birthday. 2 days ago you called asking what day of the week it was. And yesterday, she let her voice catch, theatrical and precise. Yesterday we stopped by and found you'd left the garage door wide open all night, with the table saw still running. Anybody could have walked in. You could have hurt yourself. The room went still, except for the kitchen clock ticking above the stove, the one Carol bought at a flea market in Boone 20 years ago. I stared at my daughter-in-law and felt the floor tilt slightly beneath my boots. The table saw. For one disorienting second, my mind reached for the memory, tried to conjure the sound of it running, the smell of sawdust in the dark. But I hadn't touched that saw in over 4 months. I'd unplugged it myself after nearly nicking my thumb in February, coiled the cord, and hung it on its hook exactly where it still was. It was physically impossible for what she described to have happened. A cold certainty settled into my chest. I wasn't losing my grip on reality. My daughter-in-law was lying to my face, smoothly, confidently, and for a reason I hadn't yet uncovered. Here's what they'd forgotten, or maybe never bothered to learn. Before I ever sold a single bag of nails, I spent 26 years as a state insurance fraud investigator, the man companies called when a claim smelled wrong. I'd sat across tables from arsonists who cried real tears, from embezzlers who looked you in the eye without blinking. I knew what a constructed lie looked like in real time, the small tells, the rehearsed cadence. I was looking at every one of those tells right now on the faces of my own son and his wife. Every instinct screamed at me to throw the lien notice across the table and demand the truth. But 26 years of fieldwork had taught me something more valuable than anger. If you confront a liar before you have proof, you only teach them to lie better. I had to let them believe they'd won. So I let my shoulders drop. I let my hands tremble, just slightly, just enough. I left the saw running, I murmured, my voice cracking with manufactured shame. Yes, Dad, Madison said, instantly soft again, the relief in her voice unmistakable. It scared us half to death. You're getting older. It's not your fault, but you can't keep doing this alone out here. I nodded slowly, eyes down so she couldn't see what was burning behind them. Cole stood, straightening his tie with that same satisfied ease his father-in-law's lawyer would later mistake for confidence. Don't worry about the lien, Dad. I'll call the county Monday and clear it up. Just get some rest. They left me alone in that quiet kitchen, and I watched their taillights disappear down the driveway. My grief didn't vanish, but underneath it, something harder took root. They thought they'd found a confused old widower they could quietly steer into a nursing home and a power of attorney. They had no idea they'd just woken something up. Madison showed up alone the next morning before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee, carrying a small amber bottle she set on the counter with a gentle, patronizing smile. Dad, I talked to Dr. Whitfield. He says with everything you've been through losing Mom, the stress, your memory slipping, he wants you on these. Just a daily supplement to support brain function. Nothing serious. I looked at that bottle of plain white capsules and felt something old and cynical stir in the back of my mind. The same instinct that used to flag a claim before I'd even read the fine print. Don't take it. But she was my son's wife, and some stubborn, aching part of me still wanted to believe this family hadn't completely rotted from the inside. I told myself the stress of the lien letter had me jumping at shadows. I swallowed the pill with my coffee. She kissed my cheek and left for the office, promising to text every morning to check that I'd taken my dose. And because some foolish part of me still wanted peace in my own house, I did exactly as I was told. Within 2 weeks, my entire body had become a stranger to me. A thick fog settled behind my eyes by mid-morning, the kind that made simple thoughts dissolve before I could finish them. I used to be up at 5:30 every morning, out walking the property line with my coffee. By the second week, I could barely drag myself out of bed before 10. My hands developed a tremor I'd never had in my life, bad enough that I dropped a coffee mug onto the kitchen tile, watched it shatter, and simply stared at the pieces, unable to remember what I was supposed to do about it. The fog thickened day by day until I found myself standing in my own garage with no memory of why I'd walked in there. But underneath all of it, one thought kept cutting through the haze like a blade. The $42,000. Cole had sworn he'd fix it. I needed proof. One quiet afternoon, I sat down at the kitchen table and pulled my laptop toward me, fingers trembling so badly it took 4 tries to type my own email address. I navigated to my bank's website and stared at the password field. I'd used the same password for 9 years, a combination tied to Carol's birthday and the year we married. It should have come to me instantly. Instead, there was nothing, just static where a clear memory should have been. I typed something, anything, and the screen flashed red. Incorrect. I tried again. Incorrect. After the third failed attempt, the account locked itself for my protection, a notice telling me to call customer service. My hands shook so badly dialing the number that I had to set the phone down twice. When the automated voice asked for my 4-digit phone PIN, a number I'd memorized the same year I bought this house, my mind produced absolutely nothing, just fog, and underneath the fog, a slow, dawning terror. I was locked out of my own finances, unable to prove or disprove a single thing Cole had told me. And worse, I was watching my own mind dissolve in real time, unable to tell anymore which parts were real and which parts were chemical. Sitting there at that table, shaking, blank, robbed of a number I'd known for 2 decades, the truth surfaced through the fog like something rising from deep water. They weren't trying to help my memory, they were trying to erase it. I kept taking the pills in front of Madison and quietly spitting them into my palm the moment she turned away, hiding them in my cardigan pocket, flushing them later. I had to maintain the act, because if they realized I'd caught on, they'd only move faster. They came by again that weekend, Madison breezing in with a box of pastries, and that same hollow cheerfulness, Cole trailing behind, checking his watch. I was at the counter trying to pour coffee when my hand betrayed me again, the mug slipping, shattering across the floor in a spray of dark liquid and ceramic. "For God's sake," Cole muttered under his breath, not quite low enough. I dropped to my knees, gathering the pieces, playing the broken old man exactly the way they wanted to see me, and from down there I caught their reflection in the sliding glass door behind me, lit perfectly by the morning sun. Cole wasn't looking at me with concern. His face had twisted into something closer to disgust. He leaned toward Madison and murmured, "Just loud enough to carry. He's basically gone already. Won't be much longer now." Madison didn't correct him. She didn't even flinch. She simply nodded and handed him a paper towel. Something in me went very still in that moment, and the fog, for the first time in days, burned away completely. I knelt there on my own kitchen floor and let the full weight of what I'd just heard settle into my bones. Won't be much longer now. I had heard that exact same cold, calculating tone before, 30 years of it, from claims adjusters covering for arsonists, from executives who thought their polish made them untouchable. I knew that voice. I had spent my entire career taking that voice apart in front of judges and juries. The man who used to do that for a living had been sleeping inside this tired old widower, and he had just woken all the way up. I quietly began flushing every pill, 2 a day, down the toilet instead of swallowing them, while keeping every outward symptom intact for Cole and Madison's benefit. The tremor, the slow speech, the long pauses. Within 72 hours of stopping, the fog began lifting in earnest, and on the 3rd morning I poured my coffee with a hand that didn't shake at all. I had my mind back. But Cole and Madison could not be allowed to know that. I couldn't risk seeing my regular doctor in town, not with Madison listed as my emergency contact and holding medical power of attorney on file, a fact I only now understood the danger of. So I drove my old farm truck, the one without GPS, 40 miles out to a clinic in a town where nobody knew my name, paid cash, and asked for a full toxicology screen on the capsule I'd brought wrapped in a tissue. The doctor there, an older man with tired eyes, frowned at the request but took my $300 and my blood without much argument. He told me to come back in 2 days for results. The drive home gave me time to think clearly for the first time in weeks, and what surfaced wasn't just suspicion anymore, it was a plan. I had spent half my life reading people who thought they were smarter than the system. Cole and Madison believed they'd found a tired old man with failing memory and a fat retirement account. They had no idea what kind of man they were actually dealing with. The call came 2 afternoons later exactly as promised. The doctor's voice had lost all its earlier casualness. He asked if I was sitting down. I told him I was standing and perfectly clear-headed, ready for whatever he had to tell me. The capsules, he said, contained no vitamins, no supplements of any kind. They were a generic, high-dose antipsychotic, the kind prescribed for severe psychotic episodes, completely inappropriate and dangerous for a healthy man my age. He explained, in careful clinical language, that what I'd been experiencing, the tremors, the fog, the memory failures, were not signs of dementia. They were the textbook chemical signature of the drug itself, and continued use risked permanent neurological damage or a fatal cardiac event. He urged me to go to the police immediately. I thanked him, declined for the moment, and asked him to mail the certified lab report to a post office box I kept under my mother's maiden name. I hung up the phone in my empty kitchen and let the full weight of it settle over me. My own son's wife had been poisoning me, smiling at me over coffee while doing it. I called a number I hadn't dialed in almost 15 years, a man named Russell Hayes, an attorney who used to handle the legal side of insurance fraud cases I built for the state, a man who'd left private practice for a quiet civil litigation firm 2 counties over. I told him everything in the flat, clinical voice I used to use for case summaries. The tax lien, the $42,000, the antipsychotics disguised as vitamins, the conversation I'd overheard in my own kitchen. Russell went quiet for a long moment. "Walter," he finally said, "this sounds like they're building a case to get you declared incompetent. They need documented decline to push through a conservatorship. We need eyes inside your house now, and it has to be invisible." That night, just past midnight, 2 unmarked vans rolled slowly up my driveway with their headlights off. 3 men in dark clothing let themselves in through the back door I'd left unlocked and went to work without a single unnecessary word, installing cameras no larger than a shirt button into the crown molding of my study and living room, feeding encrypted footage straight to a server at Russell's office. I directed them to my study first, where a small floor safe sat hidden beneath a loose section of hardwood under my desk, holding the original deeds to all 14 store properties along with bonds Carol and I had spent decades accumulating. The work was slower than expected, the old plaster fighting their drills, and I stood watch by the front window with my heart hammering, knowing every extra minute increased the chance of discovery. At 1:45 in the morning, a small light blinked on the motion sensor I'd had installed years ago at the end of the driveway. Someone was coming. I checked the gate camera and felt my stomach drop. Madison's white SUV, crawling up the gravel with its headlights dimmed low. She'd come to check that I'd taken my night dose, the one I'd flushed hours earlier without texting her to confirm it. The crew still had wires exposed across the living room floor, plaster dust on the hardwood, the fireplace mantel half detached. There was no possible way they could finish, pack out, and vanish before she reached the porch. I told the lead technician they had 90 seconds, sent them scrambling out the back toward the tree line with their gear, and threw open my own front door into air cold enough to bite. I was wearing nothing but a thin undershirt and pajama pants, and the shock of the cold against my skin made everything that followed terrifyingly real. I staggered down the porch steps onto the frozen gravel, arms wrapped around myself, eyes wide and unfocused, and stumbled toward her headlights, calling out for Carol by name, begging her to come back inside, asking where she'd been hiding all this time. Madison froze halfway out of her car, completely thrown by the sight of me barefoot in the dark, sobbing for a woman 3 years in her grave. She grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise, hissing at me to stop the nonsense and get back inside before I caught pneumonia and ruined everything. I let my knees buckle, dragged my feet, bought every extra second I could while she dragged me bodily up the porch steps, cursing under her breath the entire way. By the time we stumbled back into the warmth of the hallway, the living room sat perfectly dark and undisturbed, not a speck of plaster dust visible anywhere. She forced a pill between my lips, watched my throat work to swallow, and left satisfied, never knowing I'd already pinned the capsule against my cheek and spit it into the sink the moment her taillights cleared the driveway. Up in the crown molding, a tiny red light blinked once, steady and alive. The cameras were watching now, and so was I. Over the following days, I watched Cole, on Russell's secure tablet, slip into my study during the empty hours while I lay in bed pretending to be sedated. I watched him kneel at my floor safe, use a key I never gave him to open it, and methodically photograph every deed, every bond, every account statement with his phone, page by careful page, building a digital map of everything I owned. Russell's forensic accountants, working in parallel, uncovered the reason. Cole's investment firm, the one he'd always bragged about over Sunday dinners, was hollow. 4 years without a single profitable deal, bleeding cash to keep up appearances. He owed close to $11 million to a private lending operation that didn't send polite collection letters. He needed collateral, real collateral, fast, and my 14 properties were exactly that. The forged signature on a loan guarantee Russell's team later found in those Delaware filings confirmed it. My son wasn't trying to protect me from my declining mind. He was feeding my entire life's work to men who would burn it to the ground the moment he defaulted. I decided to force their hand. I called Madison and told her, in a deliberately frail, hopeful voice, that I was having a clear morning and wanted to talk about the future of the properties, that I'd already called my attorney to start the paperwork to put everything into a charitable trust honoring Carol's memory, signing Monday at 9 sharp. I watched her face drain of color through the camera feed when she arrived that afternoon, watched her stammer that I couldn't possibly understand what I was doing, that I needed to cancel the appointment. I told her my mind was made up. She left in such a hurry she nearly clipped the mailbox, pulling out. I'd given them 48 hours, and I knew exactly what cornered desperate people do with 48 hours. Friday morning, before I'd finished my coffee, I heard tires tearing up the gravel, not one car, but a convoy. 2 sheriff's cruisers and a white county van pulled across my front lawn, lights flashing silently against the morning fog. 2 deputies and a woman with a thick folder of paperwork came up my porch steps and knocked hard enough to rattle the glass. They handed me an emergency court order, an ex parte guardianship, signed and stamped by a judge before sunrise, stripping me of my legal right to manage my own affairs or remain on my own property unsupervised. Cole and Madison had bypassed me completely, using forged medical affidavits from 2 out-of-state doctors who'd apparently never examined me at all, weaponizing every symptom I'd performed for them as proof of collapse. They arrived minutes later, Madison sobbing into a tissue with theatrical precision, Cole wearing the face of a heartbroken son, forced into an impossible decision. As the deputies walked me toward the van, Madison leaned in for a final embrace, pressed her mouth to my ear, and whispered words colder than the morning air. "Don't fight it, Dad. We won. Be smart, and maybe I'll get you somewhere decent." They never found the prepaid phone hidden in my cardigan's inner pocket. They had no idea the trap I'd built was already closing around their throats. I spent 3 days in that facility playing the broken old man flawlessly, mixing up dates for the staff, asking for Carol by name, refusing meals to match the deterioration in their fraudulent medical filings. Late each night, with the burner phone hidden beneath my mattress, I coordinated everything with Russell. The subpoenas for the 2 paid-off neurologists, the forensic accounting trail connecting Cole's firm to his lender, the encrypted surveillance footage of him kneeling at my safe. By law, they had 72 hours to hold a formal hearing to make the guardianship permanent, and Russell promised me we'd be ready the moment that courtroom door opened. Monday morning, the facility staff dressed me in clothes Madison had sent over: a faded flannel shirt, work boots 2 sizes too worn, a battered ball cap clearly chosen to make me look as broken and rural as possible in front of a judge. I shuffled into that courtroom exactly the way she wanted the world to see me, dragging one foot, eyes down, clutching the cap against my chest. Cole and Madison sat at the plaintiff's table in tailored suits beside a sharp young litigator who carried himself like a man who'd never lost a case he didn't deserve to lose. The bailiff called the room to order, and everyone but me rose for the judge. I remained seated, letting them believe I no longer understood basic courtroom protocol. Their attorney opened smoothly, painting a devastating portrait of cognitive collapse, citing forged affidavits, playing the footage Madison had recorded of me wandering the driveway, calling out for my dead wife. The judge, a careful, graying man, watched the screen with visible sorrow. "As you can see, Your Honor," the lawyer said, closing his binder with practiced solemnity, "Mr. Tillman is simply not safe living independently, and his family is asking this court for permanent authority to protect both him and his estate." Madison dabbed at a single, perfectly timed tear. The room waited for me to crumble, to weep, to confirm every word. I let 3 full seconds pass in silence. Then I lifted my head. I watched the judge's expression change before I'd said a single word. He set down his glasses, leaned forward, and went perfectly still. "Walter?" he said, his voice dropping into something disbelieving. "Walter Tillman?" The attorney glanced between us, confused. "Your Honor, that's the respondent. We've clearly established." The judge cut him off without raising his voice, which somehow made it more frightening. I know exactly who this man is, counselor. 18 years ago, he built the fraud case that put my own father-in-law's killer behind bars when 3 other investigators had already written it off as an accident. You're telling me this man can't tell a fraudulent affidavit from a real one? I rose to my full height for the first time since they dragged me into that facility, set my cap on the table, and asked permission to represent myself. Permission granted, the judge said, his voice now carrying none of the gentle sympathy from minutes earlier. Right on cue, Russell walked through the heavy double doors with 2 assistants wheeling boxes of evidence behind him. I laid it out piece by piece. The toxicology report proving the pills were antipsychotics, not vitamins. The financial statement showing Madison's cash purchase from an out-of-state pharmacy matching the exact dosage timeline. The surveillance footage of Cole kneeling at my safe, photographing every deed and bond I owned. The forensic trail connecting his firm directly to $11 million in predatory debt, and the forged loan guarantees bearing my signature that he'd used my own stolen photographs to construct. The courtroom watched in dead silence as the footage played, Cole's face on the monitor utterly certain no one was watching him commit a felony in his father's study. Their attorney closed his binder, packed his briefcase, and walked out without another word to either of them. Madison began sobbing for real this time, the practiced tears replaced by something raw and panicked. Cole shoved back from the table, lunged for the exit, and made it less than 10 feet before 2 bailiffs brought him down hard against the courtroom benches, cuffs ratcheting shut behind his back. The judge revoked the guardianship on the spot, declared it fraudulent from inception, and issued bench warrants for both of them on the spot: elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and the attempted poisoning of a vulnerable adult. As deputies led Madison out, she dropped to her knees in the hallway and grabbed at my boots, begging me to stop this, sobbing that I was her family, that I owed her mercy. I looked down at the woman who had smiled at me over poisoned coffee for 6 weeks straight and felt nothing soften in my chest. You gave that up the day you put pills in my cup, I told her, and I kept walking. Within 6 months, Cole was convicted on federal wire fraud and grand larceny charges and sentenced to 11 years. Madison received a lighter but still substantial sentence for elder abuse and medical fraud, along with a permanent ban from any financial fiduciary role in the state. I went home to the quiet of my own house, to Carol's roses still blooming along the porch, and worked with Russell to fold every one of my properties into an irrevocable trust that now funds legal defense for elderly people trapped in fraudulent guardianships, just like the one built against me. Some mornings I still sit on that porch with my coffee and think about how close I came to losing everything to people who shared my blood. Betrayal rarely announces itself. It wears the face of someone who calls you dad and means none of it. I've learned that real strength isn't in how much you forgive, it's in knowing exactly when forgiveness has run out and having the will left to act on it. If this story moved you, hit subscribe and tell me down in the comments, what would you have done in my place? Trust is something you give, but wisdom is knowing when to keep your eyes open while you give it. Walter never stopped loving his son, he simply refused to mistake silence for weakness. There's real comfort in that. You can hold a soft heart and a clear mind at the same time. Watch closely, love fiercely, and never let anyone convince you that growing older means growing foolish. A small note for you. This story was written and fictionalized by AI for entertainment purposes, while hoping to share a meaningful life lesson along the way.